Good morning, Deanna. Just want to check for sound.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well. Hope you are.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Jackson. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Awesome.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this second day of our fall 2020 planning and work session of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, chair of the board, and I call this meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that yesterday we experienced a few technical challenges, not unlike what our students and teachers experience every day across our state. Our team worked tirelessly to address these issues, and today we're back in order of being able to present our meeting across the state. Yesterday's meeting will be available by the end of the day on the EPI website, the YouTube site on that website. We apologize for any inconvenience, but we do encourage everyone listening today to go back. Yesterday, well worth time. In fact, speaking of yesterday, I would just like to share that after having a chance to reflect on what we heard and learned yesterday, I found it both intellectually informing, but even more inspirational and moving around our responsibilities to all the students of this state provide for their education. That historical perspective reminded me of the progress we've made across our state, particularly over the last 200 years, but even more, it reminded me of the work still remaining to completely fulfill our responsibility leading the public school system in North Carolina for every student. I really appreciate those who came and spoke to us, who gave us a chance to become students yesterday and learn from them and to be inspired by their efforts, as well as the historical context that we learned from. But this time, I'd just like to open the floor for any comments or observations that any of my colleagues would like to make concerning yesterday's activities, as well as what we plan to do today. It will be another really informative and helpful day in our pursuit of our mission. So I'll begin first, perhaps with Mr. Ford or Ms. Candace, who led yesterday's session and were leading this overall plan. And then open it to colleagues in general. Ford or Ms. Candace?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to just begin by saying thank you for grounding us and doing what we would call in the classroom recalling. That is connecting what we learned yesterday to learn today. Yesterday we spent quite a bit of time acknowledging the context and hearing from the folks who are most proximate to the issues. That is hearing from our students who fit the demographics that are often considered most marginalized. We're talking about rural students, and we're talking about students of color, as well as the educational leaders who, by their own words, they have found to be inspirational and hugely impactful in their educational journey. They share with us a lot of the challenges that they face, a lot of the things that inspire them, and what their vision is for the future, what they would like to see from us as a state board going forward. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful to have heard from Ann McCall and her really unparalleled handle and expertise on the very tough, challenging, but really fruitful and insightful development of our education system and of our state, and the cyclical nature of some of the problems and challenges that we face in lowering and eliminating barriers and eliminating gaps for our students. I'm hopeful that today will be just as, if not more impactful, as we learn about present state and folks who are working actively to help ensure that we maintain fidelity to our call, and that we further supply the state with credentialed and qualified and career ready individuals. And so with that, I'm looking forward to today's activities, and I will hand it over to my vice chair.
Once again, Mr. Ford, I don't know that I can add much more to what you just said, except to say that every time we hear from a group of students, it informs so powerfully the work that we're doing. And I would love to see us make that sort of a regular occurrence. I know we have our student advisors who sit with us, but getting a broader voice across the state is something I think we ought to try to do regularly. And like you, Chair Davis, I learned so much yesterday that about the history of education in our state. And it just points out that this work is unending, and we have to just keep our goal in sight going forward with every decision that we make. So thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to today.
Thank you both. Any comments or observations from our colleagues? Okay. With hearing none, please feel free during the course of the day, as yesterday, to share observations or comments, since we all learn from each other. Today, I'm particularly excited about the first item on our agenda, which is something that is so important. In fact, it's at the core of what we do as public servants around public education, and that is to improve the academic performance of our students in our schools. And this agenda item falls under our school turnout committee, and I'm delighted to turn to the chair of that committee, Sandy White.
Good morning, Chair Davis. Thanks so much for the introduction. I'm Amy White, and I'm the chair of the School Turnaround Committee, and I share that responsibility with the esteemed Mr. James Ford. We are indeed excited about our committee work this morning. We have two amazing presenters to talk about school turnaround in our state and the efforts, the tremendous efforts that are being made on behalf of students and districts who need the opportunity to move towards and progress towards getting every student on grade level in the state of North Carolina. So first, we're going to hear from Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, and Ms. Effie McMillan is with us. She is the Executive Director of Equity, Access, and Acceleration. And you're going to be beyond impressed with the language in this presentation this morning. I'm gonna definitely admit last month when we were discussing the framework and the strategic plan, the resolution, that there were parts of that discussion that gave me pause. But the language in this particular this slide deck is spot on with making sure that all students in the state of North Carolina have the opportunity to be their best and to become the best. So I'll recognize Angela Harrison is the superintendent with Winston-Salem. She replaced Dr. Beverly Emery, who you will hear from in the second part of this presentation. So this morning, we welcome Effie McMillan, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for this opportunity to share with the state board. And I'm excited about sharing what the District of Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools is doing to move towards more equitable outcomes for all of our students that we serve. And so just to set a little bit of context for today, I want to set up this agenda for us. First, I'm going to give a little bit of background and context for the district. I'm going to share with you our equity policy, our strategic plan, the equity levers that we feel are necessary and critical for us to move equity forward. and our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and how we are striving to continue being equitable in ensuring that our students are being able to access quality instruction despite participating in remote learning at this time. So as I set the context for the district, I want to start out with sharing with you our mission and vision. So this current year, we went through strategic planning, and part of that strategic planning was establishing a new mission and vision for the district. Our mission is Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools will engage all students in high quality, relevant learning experiences so they will graduate with interpersonal, academic, and workforce skills to compete globally and contribute to society. And our vision is that the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools will be the best place to learn and work through excellence, collaboration, and inclusiveness. And part of our vision, it was not only just about students, but it was also about the work of the teachers and school leaders. We want the environment to work for all. So a little bit about our demographics. As you can see, our racial ethnic composition, we have less than 1% American Indian, 2.6% Asian, a little over 28% Black or African American students, 27% Hispanic, 4.5% multiracial, and almost 37% of our students are white. We have about 75 languages and dialects represented, 7,000, a little over 7,000 of our students that are identified in our special education program. And this includes our pre-K students, almost 6,000 students that are identified as advanced learners. And currently our poverty rate, student poverty rate, is at 53.92%. Another thing to note about our district is not only is our population growing, but you also can see in this data presented here that there has been a demographic shift. In 2004, we only had a little over 5,000 students that were Hispanic, but you can see that as of data collected in 2019, our Hispanic population has rapidly grown to a little over 14,000 students. And we do expect that trend to continue. And so our district is a majority minority district, with most of our students being Hispanic or Black and African American. This slide and the next one will show achievement data for the district for ELA and math over time. I could have shared multiple data sets, but I just chose to show a couple. Our data doesn't look that different than that of other counties across the state, or for that matter, across the country. Achievement and discipline data, as well as data showing the placement in advanced courses, consistently reflect Black and Brown students being on the bottom. And as you can see for the math data, it shows the exact same trends, that over time we've continuously had achievement gaps. So this has been a persistent and pervasive issue for the district. So even though equity isn't a new term, Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools wanted it to be more than a buzzword. Therefore, the Culture, Climate, and Equity Committee to the Board of Education was created in 2019 and worked for a year to delve deep into the persistent challenges for our most marginalized students. After a year of convening, the committee made several suggestions, with the establishment of an equity office and equity policy being two significant outcomes. And so we know that equity work is heavy lifting. And as it was said at the introduction, it is something that is ongoing and will continue to be ongoing. So to do this work, we had to ask ourselves as a district, and I think it's important for educators across the state and the country to ask these questions and answer them honestly. Do we really want educational equity? Do you really want all students to succeed? Famed author, educator Asa Hillier once said, "We don't lack the skills, but the will to educate all kids." And will is about courage. So we also have to ask ourselves, do we have the will? And as I was sharing with a group of teachers yesterday, and we were looking at a piece called Willing to be Disturbed, are we willing to be disturbed and really challenge the data that we have in our beliefs and mindsets to create change and to improve the outcomes for all of our students? So in the next several slides, I want to share with you what our district is doing to move theory to action. Shortly after I started with the district, it's been almost a year now. I started October of last year, and Dr. Harrison began in September. So our start dates were about a month apart. We went to work with the Culture, Climate, and Equity Committee to draft an equity policy. Over the next few slides, I'm going to show you the components of the equity policy. We worked on this for a couple of months, and the board, Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board, passed the policy unanimously January 2020. So it came into effect earlier this year. As you notice that the policy starts out with the purpose. It was very intentional for us to say why we wanted this equity policy by acknowledging and understanding that there are several factors that impact student achievement, including both societal, economic, and historical factors. But it was also about a commitment to eliminating that student achievement predictability based on those social and cultural factors, including race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, language proficiency, and disability, and to make sure that we were supporting staff throughout the district. And so we wanted to also include in this purpose and really highlight for the district and the community at large is that as a district, it is our goal, our mission, our focus to provide all children with a equitable, high quality education and to close those achievement gaps through 4 areas: access to learning opportunities, having multiple measures of equity in place, resource equity, and evidence-based interventions. In addition to the purpose, an equity audit was completed from multiple stakeholders within and external to the school district. And based on that equity audit, we identified 5 areas of focus, which we identified as our pillars for equity. In our policy, we have defined each one of those pillars. And so when we think about school policy and organization administration, we have defined this as analyzing data through an equity lens to promote fairness and inclusion, a set of established expectations, guidelines, and the best practices will be implemented to support the district in achieving its mission and vision. School learning environments was another key component of the equity audit that was noticed as an area of improvement. And so the district will provide safe and well-maintained facilities and promote a variety of settings and contexts in which students will engage in academic and non-academic learning experiences that are representative of the school's community by race, ethnicity, language proficiency, gender, socioeconomic status, and disability. Academic placement, tracking, and assessment, the 3rd pillar. Here we've defined it as, and our goal is to utilize achievement data to proportionately reflect the diverse demographics of this district, of our district in special education, career and technical education, gifted education, and advanced placement programs. Our 4th pillar, professional learning, activities that are high quality, evidence-based, sustained, not standalone, one day or short-term workshops, but intensive, collaborative, job-embedded, data-driven, and classroom focused that will increase the effectiveness of teachers, school leaders, and all K-12 staff in creating culturally responsive and equitable learning environments. And our last pillar, standards and curriculum development. ESSA emphasizes a well-rounded curriculum defined as courses, activities, and programming for state-required courses and others determined by the state or LEA. So the North Carolina Standard Course of Study has outlined standards for all content areas, and these standards do clarify the learning expectations for each course, while the curriculum is the means to mastery of the standards by implementing culturally responsive and evidence-based instructional practices and integrating multicultural resources with diverse perspectives. So with each of these pillars, the work has already begun with the writing of a new teaching and learning framework, professional development that has already started in partnership with some external organizations and internal organizations to improve the effectiveness of teachers and our school leaders. We've already begun to work on developing plans for our school and learning environments, enhancing the facilities, as well as and ensuring that they will be inclusive and welcoming environments for students. And so that just gives you just a brief overview. But as we continue on with the policy, not only did we identify the purpose and outline these pillars, we also gave a clear definition of how, as a district, we would define equity. So our equity definition is here on the screen for you. And I just want to highlight just what I have in bold. This is our commitment. And educational equity involves the removal of institutional barriers so that all students, regardless of their race, socioeconomic class, language proficiency, gender, sexual orientation, disability, or ethnic background, can benefit from all aspects of the learning environment. So with our definition, we are being very intentional about our language and what our focus is to really achieve and move towards educational equity for all of our students.
Director McMillan, this is Mrs. White. I just want to, that there's so much information there. Let's just take a brief pause, and I wanted to allow any of my colleagues to ask any question that you might have of what's been so far. Anybody have a question or a thought on the presentation so far? Okay, great, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. And so as I mentioned, out of the work of the Cultural Climate and Equity Committee, the Office of Equity was established. So as a part of the policy, we've also defined what the role of the Equity Office is. And that work basically is to guide the work of the district in creating, maintaining, and evaluating equitable educational outcomes. More specifically, shall develop plans that align with the district's strategic goals and objectives anywhere where applicable, and then make sure that these plans are reviewed annually. And not only do they align to this policy, but they align to each pillar based on various data sets. So we have been very focused. One of my colleagues always uses the analogy of a target and all the arrows pointing in the same direction. And that is part of our work, is making sure we are very intentional and that all of the errors are focusing in the same direction, headed to the same target, that we are meeting the needs of all of our students. And last but not least, as a part of the policy, an Equity Advisory Council is established, and that Equity Advisory Council is one that will consist of multiple stakeholders that will give guidance and share observations and provide information that will help the district in staying focused, laser focused on decision making through an equity lens, and implementing programs and developing plans that will help us to move towards equity. Next, we worked on our strategic plan this year. So a lot has happened in 2020 other than COVID-19, planning for COVID-19 for our school district. And so there was multiple stakeholders, of course, that came together to develop our strategic plan. In an effort to create a more equitable outcome, the district hosted multiple sessions with participants engaging in the SWOT analysis to set forth 5 bold goals. And I say there are 5 bold goals because I truly believe that they are bold goals that we are working to achieve over the next 5 years. As you can see them here on the screen. Goal 1 focuses specifically on student achievement. We have a goal 2 that's specifically about equity and access. Goal 3, community engagement. Goal 4, human resources and development. And goal 5, climate and safety. Even though Equity is woven throughout the objectives and action steps for each goal. As you can see, goal 2 specifically focuses on how the district will tackle some of its most challenging issues, such as increasing enrollment and access to AIG, CTE, AP, IB, dual enrollment, reducing discipline disproportionality. Another goal that I want to highlight is goal 5. And so we know that students thrive in inclusive, welcoming environments. Therefore, this goal sets forth both objectives that address improving the quality of each learning environment, access to mental and behavioral health supports. For each of the goals, there are multiple action steps that will be implemented, from reviewing and revising policies to improving and or developing practices or implementing programs that create more equitable access, as well as staff engaging in professional development centered around cultural proficiency, cultural sensitivity, and implicit bias. So Deanna, you can actually go on to the next slide. Thank you. So not only does the district's equity policy and strategic plan goals, objectives, and action steps align to the State Board of Education's goal 1, eliminating opportunity gaps, and goal 2, improving school and district performance, we also recognize that as district departments work to develop plans that align to our strategic plan and 5 equity pillars that are outlined in the equity policy, that we must be intentional in leveraging these critical aspects if we are to actualize educational equity for all of our students. So as you see here on the screen, these are the equity levers that we feel are critical to the work of advancing equity and producing equitable outcomes for our students. We must have an instructional framework that is focused on rigorous and culturally responsive instruction and resources. Students must have access to higher level courses. So we have to be intentional for making sure that we're removing barriers to students being able to access those courses, and not only accessing higher level courses, but having a clear pathway for CTE completion and not just taking courses with no goal or ended way of achievement. Socially, emotional learning is also a critical component. Making sure that we have the best teachers and principals leading the schools that, in our district, we have 8 schools that are high priority, low performing schools. And one of the things that we've already done has placed principals and teachers in those schools that are top notch. They are high quality leaders, experienced in school turnaround, and they have a staff that is working hard for all of the students as well. We feel like it's important to make sure that we're engaging our families, our parents, and our community, because that partnership is essential to the success of all students. And last but not least, policy and practices. It's important that we're looking at the policies that we already have in place, revising policies, or eliminating policies, or adding policies that are going to create more equitable outcomes for students. And the last part of my presentation is going to focus on our response to COVID-19, because this pandemic presented many challenges to our district as well as other districts across the county and districts across the country. Inequities existed prior to COVID-19, as we're all aware, as a result of longstanding policies and practices, and this pandemic only exacerbated those inequities, causing school districts across the country to re-examine itself, its practices, its policies, and to problem solve and seek solutions in ways that districts have never done before. Based on the public health necessity presented by COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, most U.S. schools, like Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, closed their physical spaces in March 2020. National research has indicated that early evidence suggests that the closing of schools and migration to online learning has had harmful effects on children's academic performance. Research has also shown that school disruption can slow academic progress and hamper social emotional development of children. Moreover, the health crisis has surfaced for a broader public what many educators and policymakers have known for decades, namely growing disparities of resources and educational outcomes for historically marginalized, disadvantaged, and underserved students. Historic inequities make it all the more important to focus attention not only on the near-term needs, but on whether and how the education system can continue the struggle for access and opportunity. So as we began planning, not only did we know inequities existed, but these were some additional concerns that we had. How were all of our students going to have access to remote learning? How are we going to engage them through an online platform? What were the mental health supports needed? How about our special population students? What challenges it would present for them, and what did we need to do to mitigate those challenges? Improving our communication was vital because, as I mentioned earlier, we have 75 languages that are spoken in our district. And even though the highest percentage of the second language is Spanish, we have students, families that speak Arabic, Qurani, Mandarin, and the list goes on and on and on. And we had to make sure that we reached all of our families. So communication was critical. And then professional development. How do we get all teachers prepared to begin to deliver instruction online? And even another part of our professional development has been for families. Parent sessions to help them navigate learning and supporting their students in this remote online learning environment. So we are currently in Plan C, and making a decision for Plan C was difficult because we knew students thrive better in face-to-face. And even as we are moving towards Plan B, equity and access is at the forefront of our mind. And so as a part of some of the work that we did in planning for COVID-19, we created a guidebook for families where we intentionally reminded them our commitment to access and equity and our commitment to making sure that we were leveraging all avenues to ensure that each child could have their basic needs met and engage in learning. Knowing there was not a one-size-fits-all solution to achieving equity pre-COVID, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution now. But as a district, we knew we needed to focus on a few things and try to get those things right. Countless hours were spent discussing, planning, preparing how to address basic necessities, academic learning, and the well-being of each person. Everything will not shift or change overnight, but as educators, we all must continue to keep students at the center of our conversations and decision-making. So with those basic necessities, meals, addressing the digital divide, there was a lot of work that we did as a district to address the digital divide. Social emotional support, and of course, communicating with families. Their academic learning, making sure that we were providing quality instruction that was going to be designed and delivered through our learning management system, Canvas, in an effort not to expand the achievement gap. And that was why professional development was so important and necessary for everyone across the district. Most districts implemented similar strategies, such as distribution of meals, Chromebooks, or other technology devices, hotspots, increasing communication and offering a hotline for parents and families to call for support, and outfitting school buses with Wi-Fi that could be extended into communities. For us, that meant 20 buses that are parked daily in community where there's lack of access to internet broadband. In terms of our buses, we will be moving to allow small numbers of students on the bus where they will not only have access to the internet, but also a tutor who will be available to support student learning. So that's our next step with utilizing our buses. And as you see on the screen, there was many other things from the guidebook for parents multiple community partnerships. I have to commend our community for how they have stepped up to help support the efforts in our district and to support and provide wraparound support for our students, with one of those things being our remote learning centers. And so when we started our work with remote learning centers, we began working with community partners, asking them, can they just take in a few students a day and provide a safe space for them, a place where they could get internet, and we would provide meals and other supports that they needed. At this time, we have about 40 remote learning centers, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later and tell you how we are serving our students in those environments. To my knowledge, Winston-Salem Forsyth Schools might be the only district that has developed and implemented CARES team. The CARES, or Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Team model, was designed to support students engaged in remote learning who may have challenges connecting and require specialized interventions to overcome any barrier that they may be encountering. This includes supporting and engaging families. Thus, there is a school-based team and a community-based team. Now, the school-based team, is made up of 5 staff members at a school, which could be teachers, the administrator, or any of their student services staff like social workers or counselors. One person is a lead. So if a student is not engaging or having challenges, the school-based team intervenes first. After they have exhausted multiple efforts with little to no success, then a referral is made to our community-based teams. Now, for our community-based teams, we have 5 community liaisons that were hired. Our district is broken up into 5 areas. So there's a community liaison that is assigned to each area. There are parent assistants. These parent assistants are bilingual. We have tech assistants that also serve on the team. And then we have tutors. And so with this community-based team, what has been so powerful for our community is that when students are having issues connecting to the internet, problems with their Chromebook, trouble accessing Canvas, communication barriers, whatever it is, when that referral is made, our community-based team is going out to their homes and mitigating the issues that they have. I also want to tell you a couple other anecdotes that makes this work so powerful, because it has led us to understanding the stories and daily lives of so many of our students and families. For example, one of our community liaisons went out to a family's home, and unbeknownst to us, the great-grandmother was raising her grandson, and great-grandmother was 80 years old. And she was very honest and said, I don't know about this technology stuff and how to help him get connected to school, but I want him to be learning online with his classmates. And so by the community liaison going out, he was able to help grandma and help her grandson connect to learning. On top of that, her grandson had some other needs and needed to see his counselor or therapist, some external providers that work with him. But because their offices weren't open, he couldn't go to the appointments, but he still needed the services. And so they were only offering it online, remotely. And the community liaison was able to intervene for them and help them set up appointments, and even helped her to set up her prescriptions so they would come to her home. So it went beyond just helping the child, but really meeting the family's needs. There's so many stories that are like that. And when our community liaisons go out, sometimes they may be going for one child and come to find out there are multiple children in the home, multiple families that are living in the home, and they're able to support and serve those families in real time. Even just one last quick story is one of our teen mothers who wanted to participate in school, just was having challenges doing it. And so one of the creative things that we did is that we took one of our empty buildings and created it as a space for high school students, teen moms to be able to come. And they're even being able to provide childcare for her. So just there's countless stories that they've encountered, but this is the power that these teams have had, that has provided wraparound support for our families and helped them to get students engaged, logged in, and connected with their teachers and schools. So through all of these actions, we're working hard to provide wraparound services, wraparound support, as I've said before, for our students and families who live in some of our most underserved communities, as well as those who live across the entire county, because we also have many rural areas too. And so we're providing support for them as well through many of the things that you're seeing here: translation and interpretation with our parent assistants, technology support, providing the technology for families, very interesting, very productive partnership that we have was with our housing authority in Winston-Salem. And because of that partnership and other community organizations becoming involved, 2 of our housing communities that are most underserved, highest poverty rates and needs for families, was able to get internet broadband installed in every single unit so that children could connect to learning. And so those are some things that we're really excited about and how we're trying to bridge the gap and put resources in places where kids need them the most. So last but not least, one of our responses, as you heard me mention earlier, was our remote learning centers. So the district has been working with multiple faith-based, nonprofit, private entities to open remote learning centers across the county. Currently, these sites are serving approximately 900 students at 40 sites. There are some that are fee-based and some that are free. And we continue to work with the community to secure sites that are at a free or at a low cost for families, such as our 2 tent locations sponsored by the Urban League, which you see one picture, lower right corner of one of our tent locations that's at 2 of our local parks, which is free and able to serve up to 240 students, and even our rec centers that are only charging $25. We have multiple churches and other partnerships that have opened up their spaces to serve our students, and we are most grateful that they have a safe place to go where they can get support from tutors that we are providing from the district and get help with learning, access to internet, and being able to engage. So just in closing, one of the core beliefs for the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools District is equity. By adopting an equity policy and setting forth bold goals, objectives, and actions in the strategic plan, the district has proven its commitment and dedication to disrupting systemic inequities that have historically marginalized students, ensuring equitable distribution of services and resources. And if we apply this theory of action or change that you see on the screen in front of you, we know that the district can build a culture of equity and improve the life chances of all of our students. I'll give you just a moment to read through that. So again, I want to thank you for this opportunity to share how the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools District is working to achieve equity and improve the educational outcomes of all of our students. At this time, are there any questions?
Director McMillan, that is impressive work. You most certainly have taken the opportunity to move from good to better and from better to best. And it's exciting to see the district has collaborated with all of its community partners to put in place at best an opportunity for students to maintain their access to quality instructional delivery. Got a
Thank you
question?
so very much.
Yes, ma'am. Questions from colleagues about anything that's been shared? It's a lot. It's so much you can't really even digest it, but, anyone have a question? Chair Davis?
Thank you, Ms. White, and particularly thank you, Ms. McMillan. I do have a couple of questions, particularly around this slide. How have you and your teammates in the district office of the Winston-Salem Forsyth school system integrated equity into the everyday aspects of your work in terms of disrupting, instructing, investing, supporting, and empowering? How have you as a team created the change necessary at the district level?
Okay, so a great question, and thank you for that. So one of the, I think just in a couple of ways that I will share. One is that our leaders, many of our leaders, already have an equity mindset. We have a new chief academic officer. She entered our district already with an equity focus, equity mindset. And when she came in and began work with the instructional services team, equity was at the forefront of the teaching and learning instructional framework that was developed. The professional development equity is woven through. So one of the ways is that the leaders have to be equity minded. And one of the things that when we're sitting around the table talking and planning, one of the questions we always ask is that equitable? And through a list of questions that I've also shared with department leads, such as, does it align with the district mission or vision? Whom does this decision affect both positively and negatively? Who does this decision being made ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other intended outcomes? So even having those questions to help guide decision making is extremely important. We also have a partnership where we're working with the University of Virginia for school turnaround for 8 of our lowest performing schools. Equity is woven through every part of the work that they're doing with us and the leaders that have been placed in those schools. And so anytime something comes up, even I got an email the other day about, I want to say it was security cameras and how they were going to be placed or distributed to different schools, the numbers. The question from our security team came with, is this equitable? And so because we're having intentional conversations, talking about it, it's at the forefront of everybody's mind. And they're thinking through it and collaborating and problem solving using an equity lens, and trying just to be very intentional.
May I ask a follow-up?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Ms. McMillan, from your perspective, how can the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction best support districts like yours who are making great progress in equity? And also, how can we support districts who perhaps have not made as much progress as you've made?
So I think part of that is resources. I think resources are necessary. If one thing this pandemic has shown us is that there are a lot of our students that we serve who do not have technology or internet broadband at home where they can support learning. So even though they had instruction in class when they went home, and teachers are asking them to complete assignments or do a projects or any number of things, those resources just were not there for them to be able to do it. And so ways that we can have greater resource equity would definitely help to support districts like mine, as well as other districts. Now, I'm going to step a little bit outside of the district realm because I have about 15 years of experience with being part-time faculty at my alma mater, North Carolina A&T State University. And another thing, and that is in your strategic plan as well, is preparing teachers, future teachers, to be ready on day one when they enter a classroom. So our recruitment efforts to increase the numbers of students leaving high school who want to become teachers is vital for the success of all of our students, and that when they get into their college education programs, that those programs are high quality programs, they are rigorous, and they are preparing our students for the challenges that they're going to face on day one. I feel like those two things will definitely support school districts like mine and schools that are not in the same place that we are in. And I also feel like, too, that based on the strategic plan, bold goals that you have set forth as a district, the support that districts can get to align their efforts to the state's efforts will all have us pointed going in the same direction. And we may not all get there at the same time, but we all should be working towards ensuring that there is equitable access opportunities for all of our students, and that school districts have the means, the supports to be able to move along that journey to get their students there.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question, Mr. Ford?
Mr. Ford, Mr. Bristow Smith is ahead of you, sir. So you're on the queue, you're on deck. Mr. Bristow Smith, do you want to ask a question?
Well, Mr. Ford, this may be the only time I will ever one up you. Thank you so much, Ms. White. And Ms. McMillan,
Yes.
I grew up in Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, K-12, graduated from there, and have such affection for that school system. You all did right by me. And I want to just tell you how much it warms my heart to hear the incredible work you're doing around equity.
Thank you.
My question to you is about local leadership and how you have brought on board your equity vision when working with county commissioners that provide so much resources for you at a local level. How explicit and how has the school system been with your equity vision as you worked with county commissioners? And then a second related question, and then I'll stop. How explicit have you been with your beyond the school system, specifically working with families and with students in discussing equity with them as a value that the school system is using to shape decisions? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. White.
Thank you for that question. So the first part of your question, I wish Dr. Harrison was here, because she's had more direct one-on-one contact and interaction with our county commissioners. And so I would have to lean to her, and she's not here today. But I know that Dr. Harrison also is very equity focused. She operates through an equity lens. And I know that I'm confident that when she's talking to county commissioners, she's talking explicitly about the needs of our students in the various communities and what is needed to help close those gaps and to support our students and families. I will say that, and I may need you to ask me the second question again, but I also will say is that when COVID hit and when we started over the summer planning for students and began the concept of remote learning centers, one mayor, and I won't call his name, in one of our municipalities reached out intentionally to say, we have a need in our community, and I want our community to step up and support the students of Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. And so he wasn't the only leader that did that, but he was one that emailed me directly. But there were multiple leaders, local leaders, and not just on our county commissioner board or city council, but other leaders in the community that came to the table and said, we want to be thought partners in this work, and how can we support you in executing this vision? And so I think the second part of that question is, how have we explicitly communicated it with the district? And so even when COVID hit, part of it is that we have presented that of course, the policy went to the school board. We worked with this Culture, Climate, and Equity Committee, and we set forth in our strategic plan, which is being communicated in the process of being communicated to the community at large. And so there's already the conversation that has started about our intentional focus for equity, and that will be more of a discussion as time goes on and we really roll out our strategic plan to all our stakeholders.
Thank you for that answer. All right, Mr. Ford, I'll turn the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Ms. McMillan, first and foremost, let me say thank you. This work is incredibly impressive and it's encouraging on a number of levels. I will say that I'm gratified knowledge of and explicit connections you pointed out to our strategic plan as a state board that I had to say makes us feel good, makes us feel as if we're supporting you all in this work. I have a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned, sort of the equity office and the work that you all do. And can you just kind of talk about how the work of the equity office is integrated with the rest of the district? I presume you all, aren't permitted to move unilaterally or rather separate sort of satellite of the rest of the district. My presumption is that work is integrated into everything the district does. So that's question one. And the second one is, as a part of the equity strategy, I noticed you say invest in recruiting and retaining diverse and high quality staff. And can you just speak to the notion of the diverse staff piece, why that is important and why that is part of your charge?
Okay, so for the first part of your question about integrating it throughout the work is that this is my 22nd, 23rd year in education, I want to say. And even though I'm new to Winston-Salem, my previous experience, one of the things that it taught me is that oftentimes departments work in silos. We're all doing great work in each of our departments, maybe focused on similar things, but the work does not overlap, overlay, or intersect in meaningful ways. And one of the things that we are working hard in our district to do is to not work in silos. And so my position, it lives directly in the Office of Equity and Accountability, where we're doing the data, we have a pulse on that, we're doing the research. But also with that, we have an integral part with school improvement planning. So working with principals, like our principals have completed their comprehensive needs assessments. And so our department is working specifically, we'll be working with the schools specifically around school improvement planning and their plans that they're going to be setting forth and revising, updating, improving throughout the course of the year. Also, in my role, what I have really set out to do is reach across those multiple departments. So, for example, I have a great working relationship with our chief academic officer. And while the work was happening around the teaching and learning framework, I was on that committee working and talking about equity, equitable practices, culturally responsive teaching. With our chief program officer, I met with her and her team yesterday because as a part of our strategic plan, we have goals and actions and objectives set out to address disproportionality and discipline, social emotional learning. And under her umbrella are those things. And so we had a great conversation where we were talking about what is this work going to look like, and that equity and the work of your office should not run parallel to each other, but it should overlap and it should work together. So I feel like we have to be very intentional and not stay in one lane, but know that equity is a collective effort. It's not just, and I'll just say my name because I'm in the role right now, but other equity offices across the state, and even if school districts don't have an equity office, that one person is not the keeper of all things equity, in my opinion. I feel like it has to be the work of everybody. It has to be collective. And so when we come to the table, we have to have our equity lens on. We have to have those honest conversations about what's working, what's not working, and how we move student achievement forward. And so hopefully that answers your question, but I think it just has to be intentional, cross-departmental collaboration, and cross and across schools. One of the things that I did when I first came to the district before we shut down from COVID, we have about 83 schools. Within the first probably 4 months that I was there, 4 or 5 months that I was there, I visited about 65 schools. And so part of that was to start building the relationship and to even begin to talk to principals about what does equity mean to them. So that now with our definition and our policy, we have a consensus and an understanding. So we are speaking from a common language, and we're continuing to work on that, and we'll work on that in the future. Can you remind me of the second question? I think it was about diverse workforce.
Yeah, I know the time is waning. The importance of
I'll make
diverse
it quick.
and high quality staff. Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
I'll make it quick. So for diverse, I feel like representation is important. Just simply stated. I think that it's instrumental. I feel like students of color need to see teachers of color, just like they see any other teacher. I think they need to know what the possibilities are and have that representation and that connection. And as far as high quality, we feel as a district that no matter where a child goes to school, they should be able to walk into a building and teachers are prepared to teach and can provide them with a high quality instruction. So that means ongoing professional development, job embedded coaching. That means all of that. And with hiring new staff, they implemented a principal pipeline process. And that principal pipeline process was very rigorous, that people who were applying to have a position in the district had to go to, so that we could get the best to lead our schools. And so I think it takes great leadership and quality instruction in order to make sure that children get a sound basic education.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Director McMillan.
You're welcome.
I'm going to bring this portion of our presentation this morning to a close. And Ms. McMillan, your focus on and your challenge to us that as a state that we disrupt current policies and practices to work towards the common educational good of all students, that we instruct high quality professionals to offer and learning opportunities so that we can apply culturally responsive instructional strategies, that we invest, that we collaborate, that we give everything that we have, every resource that we have, time, talent, and resources, that we support and foster conversations with all community partners, and that we empower teachers and students with enriching opportunities to utilize practices in our classrooms so that every student has an opportunity to succeed. We thank you for highlighting those pillars during this presentation. We look forward to hearing more as you have outcomes and data that suggest the future achievement of the students in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, and the ripple effect that might have on students across our state. Sure. Vice Chair Duncan.
Could Ms. McMillan send us the data-driven metrics for the equity goals incorporated into this plan? So we learn from those as well.
Okay. We are still developing those. And so as soon as we have them finalized, we can get those to you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
We appreciate your time this morning and the good work that you're doing. And as a former teacher at North Forsyth, I'll say go Vikings.
Awesome. All these Winston-Salem, Forsyth County school graduates.
Love it. Okay, so I'm excited now to invite Dr. Beverly Emery up to the podium. For those of you who may not have been just absolutely glued to your seats and your radios and your computers, Dr. Emery has had a recent responsibility added to her deck of many things that she is doing. As you know, our state and particularly the Board of Education and every school across our state has been charged with meeting the statutory requirements and meeting the legal case before us, known as Leandro. Dr. Beverly Emery is going to lead the public instructions response as we try to make sure that every child in our state has access to a sound and basic education. Dr. Emery.
Great, thank you. I also want to thank Dr. Effie, Dr. McMillan. She's a friend, and Vice Chair Duncan. I tried unmercifully to steal her from Gilbert County Schools when I was in Winston-Salem precise, so I have to commend Dr. Hairston for being able to make that happen. I'm so proud of the work that they're doing and the courage that it takes to step up. And I also want to commend their board, because we all know these things happen when you have a supportive board. I'm asked to do two things here, and I will try to do them swiftly so that we have some time to interact and engage, because I really would like to hear from our board as well. One is just why Bev, why you and this work, and I know we all have resumes, but maybe share a few personal things with you that would help you understand my passion and my gratefulness to be able to shift into some of this work, and then to give you an early update on where we are, and again, if time permits, some engagement of this group around what you would also see as my role here. Yesterday really had me reflect on how important student voice is. It took me back to Oberlin City Schools in Oberlin, Ohio, where I was really blessed to work for 5 years with Dr. Ron Ferguson, who some of you may know of, who started the Minority Student Achievement Network out of Harvard and started with 15, 16 districts across the country, where really the idea was to survey student voice and educator voice and find the dissonance and bring those groups together to really talk about what folks didn't recognize. And when those students were talking yesterday, it took me back to an auditorium and a stage where Dr. Ferguson was talking to students in my district, who made it really clear to an audience full of teachers that when you think you're helping me because you feel bad for me because I don't turn in my assignments, what you're really telling me is you don't expect or believe that I can do the work. And in that room, in that moment, those moments you have in your lifetime, I will never forget sort of the epiphany that happened there, where adults realized that while their intentions may have been empathetic, that they were really detrimental to the achievement outcomes of those students. I also reflected yesterday on the many student conversations my colleague, board member Camden, and I had when I worked in Eastern North Carolina in a district that, when I got there, didn't have one but two court orders that were more than 50 years old. And even when a city school merged with a county school, they had never sought unitary status. And 7 years of work there to lead that district with unitary status, but also with partners in a community that understood that the education of everyone was everyone's responsibility. Even in the district that we just heard from, how do we rally a community around huge demographic change in 20 years, when in fact a district 20 years earlier had been fairly well integrated, that in 2013, 14, 15 was very much racially isolated. And a lot of that was finger pointing, but people not understanding that basically their population had shifted, and there was great work to do in infrastructure there. So as I look at those things and think about my why, I just have to take 2 minutes to tell you, wherever I go, my why lives in this rock. And I'm going to show it to Alex too, anybody else. So very quickly, in 1988, I took my first principalship in Darlington County, South Carolina. It was under court ordered DSEG, and I was in one elementary school that had been integrated. Now, I know that sounds funny, and maybe not so much after listening to Ann yesterday, that in 1988, a district that had been under more than 25 years of court-ordered DSEC still was very much racially isolated. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a young kid. I was really excited to be there, but I sort of stumbled around. And when I look back at that experience, the power of what it taught me was huge. And there is one child from there who dramatically affected my life, and that is Henry. And as educators, we always get little doodahs, you know, with the holidays and stuff, our desks fill up. And the power of this one, more than 30 years old, has gone with me everywhere, because this is what Henry could give me at Painted Rock. It was wrapped in a newspaper. Henry was one of my first customers as a principal. He was a runner. I got to know him really well. Henry was the kid you could shut your office door because you knew he was getting ready to leave, and he would punch you in the stomach, and you called someone, grandma, mama, and by the time somebody got there to pick him up, he had wrapped his glorious arms around your waist and didn't want to leave you. Came to find out Henry was having petit mal seizures. All of his behavioral issues turned out to be neurological, and actually inside there was this incredible boy, really smart. In my very short 3 years in Darlington County, Henry got in trouble with the law, and in order to avoid any record or any juvenile type probation or any kind of incarceration, he had an option at diversion. He could spend 5 days in a diversion program. The caveat was that an adult had to go with him. And as you might imagine, there's mama and grandmama, and they're working really hard to make sure everybody has what their needs are, and no one could go. And Bev, who was on the beginning of a dissertation journey, decided, I'm gonna do that. And I have to say to you, those 5 days were the most powerful, probably experience of my life other than becoming a mother. I learned more from those kids in that camp, and it dramatically impacted the trajectory of my life. I did a doctoral dissertation on what kept African-American male gang members in school. I have spent a lifetime trying to impact that gap. And the reason you see me in the chat box, or you see the poster on the front of the door that we talked about yesterday from Ron Edmonds about, we know what we need to do, it's just how do we deal with that? We haven't found the courage to do it yet, is why I'm here. And I just want to say to you, I hope you will take that as passion and great energy at the back end, more than 30 years after Henry, to really try to have an impact on this world. We do have a unique opportunity here, and I'm just incredibly grateful to you for giving me a couple of years here to try to have an impact on it. So with that, I want to move into just the slides here, and just talk a little bit about where we are with this. Again, we have the approved short-term plan, which I know all of you are familiar with, those 41 steps actually in working with the state superintendent and the state board chair on how does this position work, really disaggregated all those steps, and most of them already fell in my side of the house. So it was a pretty easy decision about which divisions would come to work with us. And again, I'm trying to create alignment here in the agency. In the next two slides, I won't spend much time with them. I just think it's really important to our messaging that we continue to look at these 7 priorities. Yesterday, this morning, looking at all of our work, there isn't anything we do that doesn't fall. And I don't believe there's anything here that's new. I again believe it's the will, the resources, and the leadership required to make this stuff happen. And it doesn't happen in isolation. So looking at those 7 key priorities outlined by Leandro, where I'd like to spend my time is on this chart that I don't know that you can see really well, and we'll work on work on that. But I have attempted here to try to show my role in connecting, intersecting, facilitating, and being a champion for this work. And so if you'll indulge me just a few minutes here, I believe that starts with the early work of this board. Of course, Leandro has been around for a very long time, but we have a new strategic plan. We have incredible goals. In my opinion, those 3 goals completely connect the action steps and the priorities of West Ed. You just approved a historical resolution and a framework around that. And so I, in the little bubble, put what is really a lot of your work, and I didn't mean for that to look like it's smaller than the plan or the framework, but seriously the role here of how do we look at the work of Leandro through the budget, legislative, and policy lens of this board. So part of my role, I believe, is working with all of our stakeholders and you in terms of recommending or bringing to you areas that fit within your current responsibilities, but also advance those issues of Leandro. If you slide over to the governor's office, I've been working hard there to sort of get caught up on the work that they're doing. There is project management coming out of the governor's office with Elizabeth Cunningham and Jeff Coltrane. It's been great to sort of step into those weekly meetings that are happening, both for project management as well as legal, and learning then in the last couple of weeks that there are actually work groups that we should be leading. And so we have some urgency around a couple of these that I will share with you. And again, what does that look like from legislative budget priority, and how do we work together with their office to push those? The department, we are a huge part of this, and I would say one of the silver linings around COVID has been that some of the removal of silos that is necessary to get this work done has happened in a sense of a pandemic. And you all have heard me say this, I have to say it again. From March to now, the growth of closeness in the work and understanding who in whatever division has some expertise has been remarkable. And I think that a lot of the supports and outcomes we've had as a result of COVID are things we have to nurture and grow and develop. And so the joint meetings that we had started a couple of months before COVID began really were an incubator for what we've done in the last 6 months. And I think it's critical in my role that to be aligned to these other pieces, we keep that collaboration across divisions. I was talking to a group last week, and there was all this excitement about this $427 million that came to Leandro. And I was like, well, where did you find that? Because, so I think there is some misperception that just because we have a plan and it has a budget attached to it, that those resources are there. And so that's part of what I see my role here with the department is, what are our existing resources? Are there ways we can reallocate and realign? If we don't get all of this money, how can the work that goes on here regularly put that Leandro lens on it so that we're maximizing what we have to try to achieve some of this work? I'll never forget J.B. Buxton saying to me at one point in time, there could be a point where the state board says everybody in this building is focused on Leandro. And I think if we look at it this way, our work is about that to begin with. So how do we harness that and make it more intentional? One of the things is in this slide, and I'm not going to go there because of time, but I think folks will have time if you want to look at it. There's a link there to a new template we're growing. It's not completely finished. We're calling it a navigator. It is a part of our transition process, but also really important to the work, I believe, of advancing the state board goals and the Leandro priorities. So this navigator is being done by every division director, and it will ultimately force us to look at our core work areas. How do they connect to all of this that we've already talked about? And then the end of that is just a little video we're continuing to drop in there where people will put a face with a name, and it helps all of us get to know each other. I want to move also from DPI to the area that got me here 16 months ago. I came here as Director of District and Regional Support with great excitement around this regional support structure. I'm really thrilled with sort of the evolution of that and our ability to have roots out there. I don't think we can undervalue in any way the impact that's had during COVID and our ability to support our districts in everything from where are my masks to who is going to champion broadband that work. And what I've loved about the department is different groups then coming to me and saying, hey, would your regional case managers help me with, I can't get, and so the thinking around this is the way this model is supposed to work. So I do want to tell you that we are so grateful for the CARES Act money. We have not spent any yet. And I just want the board to understand, you heard me say earlier, I come from the old school of form follows function. And so we have had many, many hours with the regional case managers and the district and regional support folks really trying to get into how do we lever 2 years worth of money? What can we reasonably do? Where can we make impact? And how does that impact affect the larger issue, which is getting those 427 million that we may need long term? So we have spent a lot of time on function. Who's our target audience? We've created a new little data set and we have reworked that thing. Do we just focus on poverty? Do we focus just on the 8 low-performing schools? When we have disaggregated this stuff out, we have found our density hasn't been great. What do you mean by that? Well, if I just focus on these 8 districts, I'm only getting about 30% of those 190 low-performing schools across the state. So I want you to know that hopefully by November, we would love to be back for you to see sort of where this plan is. My belief is once you get function, form easily follows that. We will know exactly where we need the resources, the people, the contracted services once we narrow this. And we're very close. We spent 2 more hours on Monday afternoon. We're back together again on Friday. One of the things I want the board to think about is the huge issue that has come out of that work. And that is people we support having skin in the game. And where do we have authority for that? Our team has drafted, and you will soon see a draft of a memorandum of agreement that whoever we work with, whether it's district or school, that they agree and possibly even have their local board support a memorandum of agreement with us that if we do this, you will do this. Because our goal is to go in and help build infrastructure and sustainability and share tools and resources. When we leave, we need some of that to have traction in the district to get what we need here. So built around these, you will see in the 4.5 million CARES Act, you will see some statewide services. And I would tell you that's going to be around leadership and leadership development, a lot of investment in diagnostic. So how do we send a team in and build on our current CNA, but also unpack it, do some root cause analysis, and teach the people inside that organization how to do it for themselves and apply it in a way that gets them outcomes. There is some intensive support there, and you all know we've been doing that with one district. We anticipate there will be others, but we want them to agree. One of the reasons we believe we've been successful in the district that we worked in for over a year is we've been welcomed there. And even when it's been a little tense, us going in and sitting down as we did last week and saying, okay, how do we make this work? Because there was a relationship, I think that has really helped us. So we will be back to share in very great detail where this lands. I do want to say what has been helpful with Dr. Martin and Dr. Montanari is They were here through Race to the Top, and they keep reminding me, because I'm like, we have to touch everybody. They keep reminding me that we had $111 million during Race to the Top to have impact, and we have 4.5. So tackling what is doable is really important for us in these next steps. And then on the graphic, if you will take me back a few slides, Deanna, I do want to make sure that the board was aware that each of these work groups that I have listed here, either the ones that are being led by the governor's office or the ones that we lead as DPI, have folks from our department in them, and there are also stakeholder groups attached to each of those work groups where we are to work with the EPPs, to work with NCASA, Best in C, My Future in C. Each of those 7 work groups have stakeholder groups identified as partners by the governor's office. And then, of course, that is largely driven by the plaintiff work and Judge Lee. How do we continue to be sure that the work that we're doing works within that vision of what folks believe they supported? I'm going to stop here. I think I took a little, I know we were a little behind, but I do want a little opportunity to hear from, if there is time, board expectations. It is an opportunity for me to hear, am I where you think I need to be, and are there pieces of this we've missed or that the board would like to see me orchestrate, me focus on going forward?
Thank you, Dr. Emery. Chosen that we have someone who has the heart, passion, and the dedication to lead us beyond the precipice of greatness. I dare say that if we look back to the year 2000, 20 years ago, the same schools and districts that were local forming in 2000, same schools and districts that are on that list today. And we can do better. And so in order to do better, we cannot be satisfied with the status quo. Chosen, thank you for accepting that responsibility. It comes, we can go back, well, we're already at the slide that has all of these bubbles listing groups of people with responsibility. And I'll take a point of personal privilege and just say that the thrust of responsibility has been placed upon the shoulders of educators and school systems and district leaders and the Department of Public Instruction for many, many years. And it's a giant lift. We cannot do it alone unless we really work at building better collaboration amongst all of our stakeholders. And I think there is no greater time than this, because to reference a comment made in our previous presentation in Winston-Salem Forsyth schools, Dr. McMillan or Ms. McMillan suggested that there were 40 community partners working with students that came to the table that were not school system affiliated. Churches, civic groups, folks that open their doors. They, for the very first time, are seeing the need, because the students in these remote learning care centers are not the students from double income, above the threshold of poverty families. They are the students in our state who have assumed and received the label of local forming. They're the ones that need help. So for the first time, if you want to take one positive away from COVID, we have people who have never been before engaged and can see with their own eyes and their own experiences the true need of filling and meeting the gap in education in our state. We must engage them now. You have their hearts, you have their eyes. We must find a way to promote them to be the catalyst for for improvement, and that means bringing them to the table on that slide. Colleagues, any questions for the amazing presentation that we've had this morning?
Ms. White,
Yes, Ms. Canitz?
I would just like to briefly say that for many years, Dr. Emery and I worked together in a local district, and I know what she can accomplish and where her heart is. And I can't imagine anyone better to lead this critical work and to bring those partners together in the effort. And I think I then sort of connect back to Dr. McMillan's presentation and the lesson here with Leandro, and I think also in Winston-Salem Forsyth with the equity efforts, is that someone leading the effort is a very important step in getting the work done. One person who is responsible for the effort.
Thank you, Ms. Canitz. Well, Dr. Emery, thank you for your time. I wish you could sit there on six of us in meeting in person today, and every head was bobbing. So if you could, if we could translate that affirmation for the work that's has been done and will be done. So, Mr. Chair, it appears that this particular issue session is behind us, but left for lots of future thought and future work to be done.
Thank you, Ms. White. Well done. Dr. Emery, just to show that we are all really connected, your reference to Oberlin City Schools. On a recent early morning run, less than a mile from where DBI and the State Board meet here in Raleigh, stumbled across the marker for Oberlin Village, community founded in the late 1860s by newly freed slaves, named in honor of the university who sent educators to educate some of our newest citizens. That community built churches, businesses, university themselves. They built a new life because they got the opportunity to be educated. That community today is now swallowed up in retail development, and apartments and houses in the city of Raleigh. But the community of Oberlin plays itself out all across our state. There's Freedom Hill. In Charlotte, we call it Cherry, Brick Heights. I'm sure every community across North Carolina has similar Oberlin. And I think it just goes to show that, one, we're all connected, and two, it wasn't just by chance that we were chosen to do this work in this way. So thank you for taking this on. Next, we have an opportunity to have an agenda item from one of our key partners. That is the My Future NC Committee. And what we first ask is Dr. Tipton Rogers. Okay. So filling in for the chairs of our special committee on My Future NC, I'm delighted to introduce a partner who really needs no introduction to us, for she has served the city of Carolina for years and more recently is now serves as the CEO of My Future NC, Ms. Cecilia Holden. Welcome, Ms. Holden.
Thank you, Chairman Davis. I'll do a sound check before I talk for 30 minutes and no one can hear me. Can you hear me on that end?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. I just want to start with a special thank you to the State Board of Education for giving me an opportunity to be before you today. You certainly have a full plate. I always enjoy seeing how Dr. Townsend Smith is able to weave together such a wonderful agenda. I could listen on forever, but I think that what you'll hear from My Future NC today and the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority weaves beautifully in with the agenda that you've already heard so far, and also what you'll hear after we present today. So I'd like to just remind the board today that we are focused around the state's educational attainment goals. So My Future NC was a 501c3 nonprofit created specifically with that focus. We are very fortunate to have Chairman Davis serve on the board of directors, as well as Superintendent Johnson, among many other very influential leaders across the state. We're very fortunate that the State Board of Education has continued to focus on educational attainment, especially in the midst of the pandemic. And I think you'll hear some of the work today that plays beautifully into the conversation centered around equity. Next slide, Deanna. If you look at the state's educational attainment goal, it was codified into state law in June of 2019 that we as a state would strive to have 2 million North Carolinians between the ages of 25 and 44 to hold a high quality credential or a post-secondary degree by the year 2030. If you look at this slide, you see that if the state does nothing else, we currently have projections that show that we will fall short by 300,000 individuals to meet the state's educational goal by the year 2030. What's most important to highlight here is that based on all the data and research, it's very clear and evident that we have to focus on the underserved and underrepresented populations in order to achieve our goal. Next slide. If you look at the key indicators that were looked at during the course of the work of My Future NC Commission, there were several key performance indicators, one of which is Fafsa Completion. And the key performance indicators show that if we can improve in certain areas, that ultimately it will lead to greater educational attainment outcomes. FAFSA is one of the key performance indicators. FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. We will spend today and the next few minutes talking about how that plays into student outcomes. If you look at the data, we have about 64% of North Carolina high school graduates who have been completing the FAFSA. That was based on 2019 numbers. We actually trended down some during the course of the pandemic. But we've established a statewide goal to, over the next 10 years, by the year 2030, to try to achieve 80% FAFSA completions for all of our high school graduates. Next slide. The reason that we believe that it is very important to focus around FAFSA completions is the research and data that shows that if, in fact, you can get students to complete the FAFSA, you will end up with higher levels of educational attainment. And so based on the research, you'll see here that 90% of individuals who complete the FAFSA are slated most likely to go on to some sort of college experience as compared to 55% of students who don't complete the FAFSA. The reason that this is an indicator is because completing the FAFSA is the very first step for students to qualify and be entered into the pool to receive Pell Grants, federal Pell Grants. In addition to that, the state of North Carolina also uses the FAFSA to position students for state aid as well as other state scholarships. So this is the critical application that must be completed to allow students to see where they fit in the pool to receive student aid. The reason that that's important for our underserved and underrepresented populations is because otherwise they may see that college or think that college is not an affordable opportunity for them. But once they complete the FAFSA and they see what kind of college aid might be available, they would have hope that college after high school might be an opportunity that they could also afford. Next slide. If you look here, one of the efforts of My Future NC over the course of the last year has been to put together county attainment profiles. We did this in collaboration with Carolina Demography. And about a month ago, we released a county attainment profile, one for every single county across the state. And so every county has a unique profile that shows data specific to their county, all the way from early education, all the way through to the labor market and labor market alignment. At the bottom, what we've got highlighted here on the bottom left of the slide is opportunities for growth. And every county attainment profile includes 3 opportunities for growth that are unique to that particular county. And it's based on the data of how they're currently performing and where they could stand to see the most improvement on key indicators that ultimately would lead to increases in post-secondary attainment. Next slide. There were 15 opportunities for growth that any county would have potentially seen on their county attainment profile. All of these county attainment profiles can be found on the My Future NC website under our data section. It's easy to navigate. It's myfuturenc.org. But here, what we did was we took all 100 county attainment profiles and we aggregated those back up to see where we had the most number of counties that had listed any particular opportunity for growth. The top 3, and these are listed in order based on the number of counties that actually had that listed on their county attainment profile. So for example, NC pre-K enrollment was shown on the majority of the county attainment profiles across the state. And I'll hit on exactly why that particular one might be of interest to different counties. Research shows that for students who have access to a high quality pre-K program, ultimately that would lead to higher 3rd grade reading proficiency, and higher 3rd grade reading proficiency ultimately leads to higher levels of educational attainment. So that's one example of the types of opportunities for growth that My Future NC has been focused around. The second one listed here is low performing schools. Certainly heard that earlier in today's conversation. That's been a focus at the state board table for quite some time and will continue to be, I'm sure. The third one, which it leads us to today's specific topic of conversation, is Fafsa Completion. So on all the 100 county attainment profiles, increasing the number of FAFSAs completed was the 3rd highest number of, it appeared on the 3rd largest number of counties, county attainment profiles for their opportunities for growth. So My Future NC has focused our efforts around FAFSA completions as one of the strands of work that we've been working on in the year 2020 and will continue to work on moving forward. This is not something that's brand new. There has been a lot of work underway across the state for a number of years. And so I'm very thrilled today to have co-presenting with me Catherine Marker, who is with the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority. She will share with you the work that's been underway under the College Foundation of North Carolina umbrella brand. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine for a few slides, and then I'll join back after Catherine finishes. Catherine, can you hear?
I can. Can you hear me?
We certainly can.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Catherine Marker, and I'm at the State Education Assistance Authority, and we are a state agency, perhaps a little less well-known than some, so we wanted to introduce ourselves to you briefly. We're the state agency that helps North Carolina pay for education. So we're about financial aid, savings programs for college, teaching educators about financial aid, and teaching educators how to help students with FAFSA completion. So whether you've heard of SEAA, the authority, this state agency before or not, know that we are connected to a lot of the scholarship programs that you've heard of. We're the fiscal agent for a number of things like the Teaching Fellows Program and the Principal Preparation Program. So we are connected to the money part of it. We also do a lot of work with outreach to help North Carolinians complete the FAFSA. And one of those projects is Finish the FAFSA, which is an initiative in conjunction with the federal government and the FAFSA data so that counselors can identify students who are having trouble finishing the FAFSA, completing the FAFSA, which, as Cecilia said, is key. So that's a great tool that will play into some of the efforts that we hope to see happening in North Carolina. Also want you to see on the next slide the College Foundation of North Carolina, which is CFNC, which you might recognize mostly as cfnc.org, a website. It's more than that, but perhaps that's where you had an introduction when you or a member of your family was thinking about college, because CFNC has been around for 20 years, helping North Carolina plan for college, apply for college, and this is SEAA's part, pay for college. So it's a collaboration of a variety of entities. Make sure you see the DPI listed there as one of the collaborating entities. So cfnc.org, the website, just launched the next generation, a new modern look and feel to the website. So if you haven't seen it in a while, please log on. It's exciting. The 2020 next generation of CFNC. So other things going on there to remember that CFNC is unique because it focuses on North Carolina colleges. It's a free service to the citizens of North Carolina. So important for everyone to connected to education to be familiar with. Our agency that I introduced you to, SEAA, the authority we call ourselves, we're responsible for that pay section. So, but I did want to mention too, before we leave the slide, that CFNC is more than a website. There are a number of robust resources to K-12 schools around the state. For example, there are field representatives in each area code around the state. So they are there serving the local community. There are 7 of those, and then there are 2 additional serving the state in Spanish services. And those representatives are experts in these areas, planning, applying, and paying. And in good times, they meet in person and do presentations. And these days, they're just as busy doing the virtual work with schools around the state and the counselors, the students that they serve. The next slide shows that really specifically some of the supports from DPI. I wanted to highlight the North Carolina School Counseling Strategic Leadership Team, which has membership from the organizations that we've been talking about here today, ours, the authority, other entities that comprise CFNC, My Future NC, school districts. There are a number of stakeholders there that participate in that cross-sector initiative. School counseling consultant at DPI also collaborates with the CFNC Pathways Office, which is about career planning, college readiness, and together they coordinate online courses for school personnel to teach school personnel, high school personnel, about financial aid and about Fafsa. A lot of communication together from DPI happening there. So, before we leave that DPI slide, I just wanted to mention too that it's important that we all work together. A number of our entities have limited resources at SEAA and Fafsa Outreach or DPI. And so the focused support of My Future NC and being able to pull together to combine our resources is incredibly helpful so that we can work together to get it done. The next slide, and the last one that I'll address myself, is the North Carolina Countdown to College, which I just wanted to put in a plug. It's going on right now. There are a number of really exciting events, live online help sessions to help students make sure they complete residency, FAFSA, and college applications. So those 3 important steps that students need in order to make their college dreams a reality. We're right now in the middle of Imagine Your Future. Next week, we're going to have FAFSA and RDS residency determination service sessions, live online. Students can just join and ask some questions, or they can lurk and hear a presentation if they don't even know what to ask. The 3rd and the 4th weeks together are college application weeks, where a number of North Carolina institutions waive their fees for students who are applying. And then that last week, we're also doing some financial aid 101. So students fill out the FAFSA. There are some things I might want to follow up on, and we will help them with that. So a little bit about SEAA, the authority, and how we're working together with DPI, and together we have CFNC, and I'll let Cecilia pick it up again with My Future.
Thanks, Catherine. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight is going back in time. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that we had gone down and decreased in terms of the number of FAFSAs that were completed this school year. I want to touch on that just a minute. So when the pandemic hit, and making sure everybody can hear me. Can you hear me okay, Deanna?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So when the pandemic hit, counselors left schools, students went home, Often these students were going home into households that didn't necessarily have a college going culture. And so we started seeing the numbers trending down year over year. And my future NC decided to take action. And so if I might be so bold as to quote Amy White, what she said last year, Amy, it resonated with me, and I probably will not get it right, but I recall you saying something along the lines of a plan is a plan until you actually execute and take action on that plan. And so with all the good work that I shared with you that occurred and all the strategic measures that we know we have to pull the lever on, we recognized that the FAFSA completions was trending down, so it was time to take action. So in partnership with College Foundation of North Carolina, Catherine Marker and her team, my future NC executed on a FAFSA frenzy in the month of June. We could not have done this but for all of the partnerships and people across all sectors, business community, everyone coming to the table to execute on a FAFSA frenzy. I want to give a shout out to my dear friend, Superintendent Tony Jackson, Superintendent Patrick Miller, Jack Hoke, DPI, the regional support managers. I could go on forever in terms of the number of individuals that came to the table, public information officers, on and on, to execute on a FAFSA frenzy very quickly. And what I will say the outcomes of that frenzy were, we were able to light up the Capitol in green. The governor actually signed a proclamation for FAFSA Frenzy Month in the month of June. But what we care about most is the outcomes of that FAFSA frenzy. We were able to increase in 67 districts and 25 charters across the state. They were able to increase the overall FAFSA completion numbers and the percentages of FAFSA completions. We moved up in ranking to 19th nationally. But where we landed overall, I think there were around 3,400 students who completed the FAFSA during the month of June. So hopefully that's 3,400 more students that we saw matriculate over to post-secondary in the fall. What we did was good. What we need to do is a marathon, not a sprint, moving forward. And we recognized that, and we were able to learn from the month of June, which positions us well moving forward into the 2021 school year around our efforts. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see here that there are several different initiatives that are currently underway. We will be executing in partnership with all of the individuals I mentioned and then more, a first in FAFSA challenge throughout the 2021 school year. As part of that challenge, we will be putting together a tool that will be made available to our schools so that they can see where they're tracking. Data is always helpful, so you can see, am I making progress or not? So we'll come out with a tool and training where our school counselors, principals, and others will have access to that to see how they're able to perform. But I want to talk about one tool in particular that's been available. This has been offered through NCSEAA for a number of years. But if you look at Finish the FAFSA, that's something that I want to hit hard on just a little bit longer. So next slide here. Finish the FAFSA is actually a data sharing agreement that is between NCSEAA and our districts or our high schools. And this allows counselors, principals, and others within the schools to have access to information that they need in order to see if a student might be trying to complete a FAFSA but is struggling and not able to do that. And so what we've encouraged across the course of the last year, my dear friend Matt Smith, he was actually the one that I'll say initiated moving this into action. And so with his help, as well as the help of many, many others, we've been able to get many of these data sharing agreements in place. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see here that as a state overall, we have all of our school districts with the exception of one, and we have all of our charter high schools with the exception of 24 that have these data sharing agreements in place. We would love to know that we have these data sharing agreements 100% in place by the end of this school year. I have some key partners who have been instrumental in helping us to get to where we are right now. They're listed on the slide to the left. Couldn't have done it without that group. But I do want to say, if you have access to be able to try to get us across the finish line on getting 100%. I think it's a tool that can be leveraged. There's no breach of confidentiality. There's no issue in terms of the data that would be shared with the counselors. It's not information that would be wage specific and things that might be controversial. It just simply says, does the student have a FAFSA completed or not? And does the student have one where they've started and maybe are struggling and can't get it through? If you look at the last slide, I'd like to highlight here, there's several actions that we would love the State Board of Education to consider. These are in perfect alignment with the State Board's strategic plan. We've partnered with Deanna Townsend Smith to identify specifically where in your state plan these might plug in. One of these is to consider adding FAFSA completion rate to the North Carolina report card. We are going about our efforts with a carrot, not a stick. This would not be to do anything more than to elevate the importance of FAFSA completions across the state. The second thing that's listed here is to add FAFSA completion rate as a field to annual graduation data verification report. This centers on the work around equity that the State Board has been so focused on. It allows us to see where we are in terms of our underserved and underrepresented populations, where we might need to target additional resources and efforts to try to support. The third thing here is for the State Board to consider aligning your dashboard with our dashboard. We have put an extensive and inordinate amount of energy into providing a long view for students from early childhood all the way through to the workforce, and where we can be helpful for you, we want to do that. So where we can align our dashboards, we would love to be able to have some sort of partnership that might be beneficial to you as well. And then the last thing here is when we do push out the FAFSA tracker, we would love to be able to make sure that schools and districts across the state are familiar with it and that they have access to this to be able to help them in seeing where they're currently tracking. So the last thing I'm going to touch on, I'm going to shift gears real quickly while I have just a moment in front of you to talk about some policy recommendations that I think are beneficial for you. Deanna, if you'll go to the next slide. At our August meeting, the My Future NC board meeting, the board passed a number of recommendations for policies for consideration for the long session. All of these center around readiness, access, completion, and labor market alignment. And if you look at the bottom, underpinned with the understanding that the basic foundational need is broadband access. I'm certainly not going to cover all of the policies that were passed for consideration for the long session, but I will touch on the ones that are, I believe, most important to you. If you look at the next slide, you'll see here, one of the things that the Department of Public Instruction, in collaboration with the community college system, has been working to implement is the College and Career Ready Graduates legislation that was passed back in 2015. One of the obstacles has been access to funding that would allow you to pay for a tool that's being used for the remediation for math and language arts for high school students. The remediation would allow students to then enter into college, directly into college credit-bearing courses. So one of our policy recommendations is that we would champion, in addition to, I'm sure, you having it on your legislative list as well, but we would be pushing to try to make sure that you get the supports that are necessary to implement that legislation. The next slide has a list of policies that are focused around career coaches and college advising corps advisors. Those individuals are helpful in the high schools to be able to make sure that students are completing FAFSAs, completing college applications, and centered around post-secondary attainment. These are all cross-sector initiatives. So I certainly want to highlight that the work of the state board has always been to add additional counselors in the school. We would certainly be supportive of that as well. These are just cross-sector recommendations. And so I didn't want you to see that it's missing and wonder if we're not supportive of that. The last things on this list here are centered around FAFSA. So what we've got is that the General Assembly would consider supports specific to FAFSA communication and the tracking tool, as well as potentially some incentives to help the high schools to roll out and to focus more around the FAFSA application process. But with that, you can, at the very last slide, I do want to just land on that and bring it back home, that this has been thankfully, there's been a flashlight shown on the fact that broadband is a huge need, and it is certainly an impediment to student success for underserved, underrepresented populations. And so that's one of the policy recommendations as well, that we would continue to focus on broadband for all students. So with that, I'm going to hit pause. Deanna, if we have time for questions, happy to answer anything. Catherine as well. So we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Holden and Dr. Marker. I turn to my colleagues for questions or comments.
Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Canitz?
Ms. Candace?
Yes. I'm so excited about this this work, Ms. Holden, because this feels like something we can jump on quickly and accomplish. And so, speaking from the Strategic Planning Committee, we will take a careful look at these actions and coordinate them with the work we're doing, and take a look at our dashboard. I think we can do that. We can do some aligning there. So I think that will serve us well. Thank you so much. And I do have one question. The data that you're gathering about Fafsa completion is going to be really useful in raising these numbers. Are you disaggregating that data in any way in order to understand which subgroups have low completion rates, and then possibly targeting actions to increase those rates?
That is one of the things that we would like to be able to have access to. We think it's very important. At this time, we don't have disaggregated data to allow us to see what potential subpopulations might be of most interest for us to target our efforts, but we do have it by county level, meaning we know which counties had the lowest number of FAFSA completions, and so we will be doing specific targeted focuses around. There were 38 that either had it on their county attainment profile or were below a certain threshold that we established at My Future. But we do not have disaggregated data, and we'd love to have that. So I think the policy recommendation that we put forward would hopefully allow us to get that information.
Thank you.
Ms. White?
So on slide 18, the whole bullet says that the necessity of communication campaign, how you can hold it, WRL. It occurs to me that FAFSA is not yet household word. That terminology is not something that is a part of parenting awareness until perhaps it's too late. That all of a sudden a student wants to apply for college, but they don't know how, and that's not common language. And so one of the strategies for making that common language is to tie it to other forms that underserved and underrepresented populations often fill out, and one of those is the free and reduced rate lunch subsidy application. And so tying that campaign to those applications might help educate the very students and families who need that information early on, that college and post-secondary educational experiences are possible and that there's funding to help. Parents are the most important, parents and grandparents are the most important encouragers for students in their education career. And so having that messaging come from home, that yes, you can go to college and you do need to take these higher level courses, and this is a possibility because there's this thing called the FAFSA, and that's how you recognize whether or not you qualify for funding. So communication strategy and a campaign early on to get the information into the hands of the stakeholders who need it most. That's my point.
Outstanding idea, Amy. I would welcome any strategies that, especially things that would help us to target the appropriate populations. We are certainly working with different communities to make sure that we are focused in on ways that we can reach populations that otherwise may not get the traditional message, as you just said. This is a fantastic idea.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
This is Tony Jackson. I want to first thank Cecilia and My Future for the work that's going on. We've developed a tremendous partnership with them, and I would say that I've said this quietly in other circles, but I'll say it here. I believe My Future has the potential to be that game changer we've really been looking for in terms of changing the mindsets of communities and families around college attainment. So I want to thank her for the tenacity in keeping that message forward and keeping it in front of our students, our superintendents, and our state. I would also say that the one thing that I would ask that there be a cross connection made with is the equity resolution, because in fact, when you look at that work, and I think it would be wise to make an intentional cross connection with that, simply because it will allow us to address, as they said, as the previous presenter talked about in Winston-Salem Foresight, access equity is a very a real part of this conversation that we have to address. And this would be one of those where we're opening up pathways for students who don't see themselves there quite yet. And it aligns with the conversations of the students who we brought before us yesterday. And finally, I think it opens the pathway, much like the last speaker talked about, for those students who are economically disadvantaged, who don't see a way to get to school. This opens that conversation for them to see themselves in that space. And so, again, I want to thank Ms. Holden for the work, My Future NC for being the model. And I would say, as a superintendent, this has the potential to be the game changer. Whatever we can do to get behind it, I think we should. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Other comments?
This is Donna Tipton-Rogers, and I'm, as you well know, some of you, I'm kind of in and out today, but I did tune in and listen. It's been a great honor to work with Cecilia and My Future NC. Very, very thorough with the ideas and the information that they're sharing. And just the thought of focus on FAFSA from a college standpoint too, it truly is a game changer. And when students realize that they can potentially seek higher education of some sort without additional cost, it makes all the difference in the world. So this is just a great thing, and I've enjoyed my work so far with My Future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Matt Smith here. Tony Jackson and I were discussing recently how important systems are to the outcomes that we hope to achieve. And as you all know, Superintendent Jackson, Tony is such an incredible visionary when it comes to systems. And I think what I'm seeing here with My Future NC and the work that Cecilia is leading is that we are looking actively at the way the systems that we have in place are designed to create certain outcomes. In connecting the dots, yesterday we heard from LaShawn Jenkins, and his one recommendation for us was to let data make our decisions when it comes to equity. And then Jill just asked a few moments ago about disaggregating our data so that we could understand subgroups. And what I wanted to call attention to is that one of Cecilia's policy recommendations is that we add Fafsa Completion to the annual graduation data verification report that every high school in North Carolina completes as part of our end-of-year procedures. In that GDVR report, for those of you who are not a building level administrator, is really where we indicate what our students' plans are when they graduate from high school. It's where we say where they are bound for. Are they bound for community college or military or four-year college or workforce? And what we're asking is that we add a field to that report that says, did we help them to complete the FAFSA? And the data sharing agreement that Cecilia is advocating for will allow every high school in the state to have a school advocate in place to help students who may not have a home advocate to complete the FAFSA. And as part of the systems that we have and the metrics that we look at and how we evaluate the support we offer students, having a FAFSA field in the GDVR report will allow us to disaggregate subgroups in North Carolina to determine exactly who is completing the FAFSA and to close those gaps. And that is equity work. And so I'm really appreciative of the leadership that Cecilia is putting forth here with the My Future NC laser focus on trying to lift up each and every student in North Carolina. And I'm grateful that some of these policy recommendations don't cost anything. They simply help us to improve our systems, and that will help us to improve our outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Duncan.
I appreciate all the comments and very supportive of increasing our FAFSA completion rate for all the reasons people articulated. I think Ms. Candace's point about disaggregating the data is important, and I would say one of the reasons is disaggregate the data, we're going to find out a lot of the non-completers from some of our more affluent families because they do not see any reason to complete in light of they recognize they would not be eligible for that funding. So that's one aspect of it, to get a better understanding of what's happening, disaggregate the data, and that way would be helpful. Second thing is someone I know well has volunteered to assist with the application preparation FAFSA, and one of the issues they've run into fairly consistently is that the student may know about it, but they can't convince their parent to help them fill out part of the form that needs to be completed. So if we don't recognize that as a discount, there are some instances in which the student is trying to do it, but can't get all the assistance from the parent or guardian necessary to actually get a fully completed, verifiable form. And that's a second challenge that figures into the disaggregation issue, as well as the strategies we go about to raise the percentage.
Other comments? Hearing none, Dr. Marker, thank you for your partnership on this. Clearly, the results of all of our efforts are pointed towards achieving the goals of My Future NC, and we appreciate your suggestions for us to consider in partnership on policy recommendations and legislative support. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you for having us.
We'll now proceed to our regular committee meetings for the day. And I'll remind our visitors and those listening online that committee meetings and reports span both days, and our October meeting also, of course, includes this planning work session. Tomorrow's meeting will include voting on any items needing action. And board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and voting on the matter. This is the month in our cycle when we receive an overview from the agency on legislative priorities, both monetary and non-monetary. In lieu of receiving that report this month, the State Board is conducting our planning and work session, providing an overview and reminder of those things that the agency should plan to include in its presentation next month when legislative requests are presented to the board. As the plan is developed, as outlined in the board's GOVR-007 rule, we will expect to receive a full accounting of expenditures and needs to formalize the final request to the General Assembly. I note the committee chairs and the audience that all voting on consent in any item requiring action will be completed tomorrow via roll call. I now recognize Ms. Amy White, Chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. It's now good afternoon to everyone. We've had an exciting morning. It's now my pleasure to shift us to the committee work for the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. I have the pleasure of leading that along with Ms. Jill Kamitz. We have just a few items today. First is an action on first read, and Mr. Jay Whalen from the Office of Charter Schools is going to bring forth the North Carolina Access Grant timeline, the request for applications, and rubric revisions for our approval. Mr. Whalen.
Great. Thank you, Ms. White, and good afternoon, members of the board. The next item in front of you is the updated timeline, application, and rubric for the NC Access program. We are getting ready to go into cycle 3 of awarding subgrants of our 5-year federal CSP grant. So the timeline is very similar to last year. We are planning to publicly release the request for application on November 13th, and letters of intent would be due on January 15th of 2021, and full applications due on March 1st, 2021. We are planning to provide several virtual informational and application training sessions starting in October and going through the application deadline on March 1st. We will then plan to bring subgrant recommendations to the Charter School Advisory Board in May, and then to this board for discussion in June and final approval in July of 2021. Updates to the application include, aside from minor grammatical and terminology updates, we replaced 2 questions on the application to better align with the goals of the program. So we replaced a question about how the education plan compares to or differs with that of the LEA, with a question around interventions, support services, and additional educational opportunities. And we also replaced the question about the school calendar with the question about the assessment program and how data is used to increase student outcomes. And then the rubric has just been updated to align with those 2 additional questions in the application. So very minor updates, but I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen, for your succinct summary of the revisions that have been made to the application and to the rubric. Board members, do you have any questions about the timeline that's proposed for this year? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much, Mr. Whalen. We'll move on to 2 discussion items that we have today. The first is EICS 2, and this is the 2020 Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee report on our virtual charter program. And I believe Ms. Ashley Vaquero is here to walk us through that.
I am. Can you hear me okay, Ms. White?
We can. Thank you, Ashley.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the 2020 report on the virtual public charter school pilot program. Next slide, Deanna. We are going to take a look at the background of the program, the legislation that created the program. We also will look at student enrollment and withdrawals, course offerings at the 2 schools, student performance data, the implementation, administration, and funding of the program. And then finally, you will see recommendations presented from the Charter School Advisory Board to your board for discussion. So the pilot program for the 2 virtual charter schools in North Carolina began with session law, and the schools started operation in the 2015 school year. The program was originally slated for a 4-year time period, and since that time, it has been expanded through additional session law for an 8-year term. So the schools are currently in their 6th year of operation and have 2 additional school years. Within the legislation that created the pilot program, there is a reporting requirement, which is what you are hearing today. The report today will report on the 5 years of operation, and then in 2 years, we will have another report prior to the conclusion of the 8-year pilot program. The structure of this presentation and the report itself, which has been presented to the board, follows the reporting requirements, and we'll go through each one of these separately. So in August 2015, the 2 virtual charter schools at the time were North Carolina Connections Academy and North Carolina Virtual Academy. In May 2019, North Carolina Connections Academy severed its partnership with its EMO and also changed its name. So now the two virtual schools are known as North Carolina Cyber Academy and North Carolina Virtual Academy. As I stated previously, both of the schools are in their 6th year of operation. The pilot legislation gives specific requirements in terms of virtual charter schools and things that are unique to those schools, covering everything from enrollment to the funding of the schools. But in general, it's important to understand that the two virtual charter schools are still subject to the statutes that our normal brick and mortar charter schools also follow. The first area within the legislation that was specific to these two schools was an enrollment cap. And the cap was set at 2,592 students originally. But within that legislation, your board was given the authority to waive that enrollment cap beginning with the 2018 school year. So there have been several prior enrollment increase requests, and there have been 2 specific approvals. So for North Carolina Virtual Academy, they were allowed to grow by 20% in the 2019 school year. And then just recently, they were allowed, approved by your board, to maintain their enrollment at just under 3,000, with a stipulation that they meet academic growth for this school year. However, there was a recent push and a request to your board to expand, to further expand enrollment within the 2 virtual charter schools. That was not approved by the state board, but a few weeks following that discussion, there was a session law passed related to COVID and funding and other COVID matters. And there was a section in that session law allowing the 2 virtual charter schools to increase their enrollment for this school year only. So you can see here on the in the language that North Carolina Cyber was allowed to increase by 1,000 students and Virtual Academy by up to 2,800 students. This is there's an interesting requirement here where this enrollment expansion is only for this specific school year. If a student enrolls pursuant to this expansion, the student is not grandfathered into the school or enrolled permanently in the school like most charter situations, but they are given priority in the next school year. I have I've spoken to both of the school leaders, and NC Cyber is planning on enrolling an additional 500 students, I believe. And then NC Virtual is planning up to 1,200 students. So the schools are planning to take advantage of this allowance that was made in this legislation. If we look a little further at student enrollment trends over time, North Carolina Cyber has seen an enrollment increase of 66.5%. This is based on the data from the first 5 years of implementation. So it has certainly increased with this year and definitely with the additional allowances for enrollment. And then withdrawal data has varied, with a low of 507 withdrawals and a high of 719 cumulative withdrawals. This just gives you a visual representation of the enrollment trends over the course of the pilot for North Carolina Cyber Academy and their withdrawal data. And then for our second school, North Carolina Virtual, they have seen a cumulative enrollment increase of almost 90%. And again, there's a variance in withdrawals from a low of 586 to a high of 650. And here again is just a visual representation of the pretty significant growth that has taken place over the 5 years of the pilot program. Before I go on, are there any questions regarding enrollment? numbers?
Not seeing any.
Okay. So something that is unique to the virtual charter schools is a withdrawal rate calculation. And it was specifically embedded in the legislation authorizing the pilot. And it states that each of the virtual public charter schools shall have a withdrawal rate below 25%. So the original legislation stated the 25% requirement, but the schools were allowed to not count finite enrollees. So this would be a student that enrolls for a specific period of time. Perhaps a young man enters one of the schools and says that he is going to be in North Carolina for 3 months, and so it is a short-term enrollment. The schools were required to keep track of those finite enrollees, and then those would be deducted from the withdrawal rate. So it's kind of like exclusions from the withdrawal rate. Originally, that was the only exclusion. Following the first year of the pilot program, there were 4 additional exclusions that were included in a session law. Those include students who regularly fail to participate. That's often called an administrative withdrawal. Students no longer qualified, so perhaps they've relocated. Students who withdraw due to a family, personal, or medical reason. And then finally, students who withdraw within the first 30 days. From the data that our office has received, the vast majority of the cases fall within that 4th point, which is those who withdraw within the first 30 days of enrollment. Looking at the specific school withdrawal rates, you can see that in the first year of operation, North Carolina Cyber was that 25% at 31% withdrawal rate. And then following the additional exclusions, the withdrawal rate has decreased. If we look at North Carolina Virtual, you will see a similar case. The first year they were below the 25%, but the following 4 years with the additional exclusions significantly decreased their withdrawal rate. Course offerings is a specific requirement of the reporting requirement. And within the report, you will see more detailed information about the course offerings. But I think the key takeaway here is that the schools have adapted over the 5 years of operation to offer a larger variety of courses, including many AP and honors options, occupational course of study options, and then a large variety of electives. And both of the schools have relayed to our office that this is due to listening to student and parent demand and questions about what students would like to see offered. For student performance and accountability, the 2 virtual charter schools are subject to the state accountability model. So they both receive an academic growth score of exceeded, met, or did not meet, and a school performance grade A to F. They receive an overall grade, and then for those subgroups for which we have enough data, they receive a subgroup score as well. Within the charter school statutes, there are 2 designations for charter schools. So there are low performing charter schools. Those are schools that receive a D or F performance grade, and then a met or not met growth score. And then there are continually low performing charter schools. And those are schools that have been designated as low performing for at least 2 of the previous 3 years. Unfortunately, both of the virtual charter schools are designated as continually low performing. You can see here, this is North Carolina Cyber. And for the 4 years for which we have data, they have received a D performance grade and a growth status of not met. And then you can see the variance between the growth index. So following the initial year of the pilot, there was some progress made, but that progress has not continued. And this is just a visual of the progress that was made after the first year, and then that progress was not sustained. This is looking at North Carolina Cyber's grade level proficiency and career and college readiness. And so as a reminder, the grade level proficiency is level 3 and above on EOG and EOC assessments. And then college and career readiness is a level 4 and above. You can see with the 4 years of data we have that the school has really stayed within I think it's a less than 10-point range of scores, and each year they have trailed the state average. If we now we're going to move over to North Carolina Virtual Academy, and you can see that they have the same performance grade and growth status as Cyber. The growth index is a bit different, but the overall performance and growth scores are the same, D's and not met. If we look at the growth trends, you can see that they have made progress over the years. There was a slight dip in 2018. And as we know, unfortunately, we did not have data from the last school year to see what the trend, how the trend would continue. I will also note that the 2 schools were given a draft of this report, and they were offered the opportunity to provide a response, and North Carolina Virtual did so. That has been included in the report as an appendix, and the school included several points of internal data, including winter EOC scores and MAP assessment data showing progress in their academic trends. Looking at their grade level proficiency and college and career readiness, you can see that it's very similar to Cyber Academy in terms of staying within a fairly small percentage and trailing the state each year of the pilot. Here is both North Carolina Cyber and Virtual Academy. Cyber Academy is the blue bars and Virtual are the orange colored bars. So if we look from the beginning of the pilot to our last year of data, you can see that the schools have actually come closer to mirroring each other in terms of grade level proficiency in college and career readiness, and had very similar scores for the 2018 school year. This is the subgroup data we have for the schools, and we only have 2 years of data as DPI began reporting this type of data in 2018. If there is not data available, then you can see that you just won't see a score for it. There are 2 subgroups that met state standards for North Carolina Cyber. So the Asian subgroup in 2017 and 2018 had a performance grade of a B, and then the white subgroup had a performance grade of a C in 2017. Next slide, Deanna. Oh, I think did we skip one, or maybe I missed one? Oh, okay, thank you. So North Carolina Virtual, this is their subgroup data, and you can see that the Asian subgroup in 2018 received a C performance grade. In 2017, the Hispanic, 2 or more races, and students with disabilities met growth. The 2 or more races received a performance grade of a C. And then in 2018, the Hispanic subgroup received a C, and the students with disabilities again met growth. The graduation rates, you can see, trail the North Carolina graduation rates. Looking at the bottom columns, you can see that, or rows, North Carolina Virtual has made significant progress over the course of the years that we have these rates for. North Carolina Cyber is struggling in that regard. And I will also note that these scores are very much mirror what we see nationally with virtual schools. The virtual four-year graduation rate is just under 50% nationally. And then the national average for graduation is 84% in whole. So what we are seeing here in North Carolina is mirroring the type of data that we have nationally as well. Student demographics, there you will see in the report year by year demographics, but I've included in this presentation the previous year, the most recent data that we have available. All of the demographic data is retrieved from the Common Education Data Analysis and Reporting System, which we use here at DPI and is known as CEDARS. What we see when we look at the demographic data over time with the two charter pilots, is that they are coming closer to mirroring what we see in the traditional public schools. However, they enroll enroll fewer Black and Hispanic students than we see in the traditional public schools. This is the data we also have from CEDARS on economically disadvantaged students. And for the two virtual charters, you can see a significant variance over the years. I will note that it has been very robust conversation among the Charter School Advisory Board and the charter school community in general about how economically disadvantaged student data is collected and whether it accurately reflects the numbers. So that is just something that I will, make part of this presentation, but our office is using the data that we have from the authoritative source here at DPI, which is shown here and in the report. Students with disabilities, for the previous year, the 2019 school year, you can see that both of the virtual charters are very similar to the numbers we see in the traditional public schools. Virtual Academy enrolling slightly more with a 13.34% enrollment of students with disabilities. For virtual charter school funding, the legislation provides 3 differences in funding for those virtual charter schools. First, the virtual charter schools are funded based on $1 per average daily membership, but it excludes the per pupil share of low wealth and small county. And while our traditional charters are funded on first month ADM, the virtual schools are funded on month 1 and month 5 membership last day. And then finally, the per pupil share of local current expenses is capped at $790 for the virtual charter schools. There is very detailed funding information within the report, but just as a summary, Cyber Academy, the funding over the term of the pilot thus far has just about doubled from $707,650,000 to over 14 million. And then for Virtual Academy, we also see over 7 million has more than doubled to over $16.5 million in state funding for that school. If we look at the state funding, due to the differences in the funding policies, you can see what the average per pupil amount is for the virtual charter schools, which in the previous year was a little bit over 5,500. And then finally, we are presenting recommendations to your board today. The reporting requirement that the General Assembly has asked the board to complete includes recommendations on the program, on the modification, the potential expansion and the continuation of the program. Because there is the remainder of this school year and then an additional 2 years of the pilot program, the Office of Charter Schools and the Charter School Advisory Board has focused on 3 areas: academic improvement, accountability, and data. And the Charter School Advisory Board did receive a draft report with recommendations. There was also an ad hoc committee formed, and those recommendations were refined and presented to you today. So the first recommendation is born out of the fact that we do not have data from the last school year, or we don't have state accountability data. And so this recommendation would be that both of the charter schools report to the CSAB and to State Board regarding their academic growth and challenges during the previous school year. If you view the appendix, North Carolina Virtual Academy has given us already data from their previous school year. So this report would really be a way for our office and for the CSAB and for your board to have some sort of data from last year that can show us where they are heading academically. And that this would be the first recommendation. The second recommendation is that during the 2021 school year, both of the charter schools submit a report to CSAB and State Board. The report would include detailed information about the student experience at each school. So for example, what kind of instructional models are being used, what kind of curriculum, software, what kind of support is being provided to students and families, how much asynchronous versus synchronous instruction is taking place, active time online, those sort of metrics that are lacking in terms of our understanding of what does a student experience when they're full-time virtual. In addition, the recommendation asks that the charter schools conduct in-depth surveys of teachers, students, and families regarding academics, culture, and support. The CSAB strongly recommends that this report and the accompanying surveys be facilitated and written by an external evaluator with expertise in virtual learning. And then finally, the third recommendation is in regards to accountability data. And this recommendation is that the 2 virtual schools be separated from the aggregate data of all charters. Often when state accountability reports are made, you see academic performance data in terms of all traditional public schools and then all charter schools, but the virtual schools don't have their own sort of evaluation. And so this would ask that they are disaggregated from that data for a few reasons. First is that the virtual charters were established and extended through a legislative process that is different than the authorization and renewal process that happens for the brick and mortar charter schools. And as I think most people are aware of now that the majority of students are virtual charter schools and virtual learning in general is different from face-to-face instructional brick and mortar schools, and therefore merits separate data analysis. So those are the recommendations before your board, along with the accompanying reports, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Chair, this is excellent work, and as we discussed in our committee call, it was a lot of information, and I really appreciate the way you provided the pre-learning experience for us. You told us what we were going to hear. You organized it well, and this report will be sent over to the JELOC. It's a little bit different than some other reports that we've had in that in this report, you've got some recommendations. And so if we indeed vote to approve this report, the recommendations then would then cause the board to perhaps take further action on how we might implement these recommendations. So I'll put that before you for discussion. Does anyone have a question for Ms. Vaquero about the presentation that's just been given. Vice Chair Duncan.
I actually had two. It was interesting for the public schools on students with disabilities, all those ranged right in the 12, right below 12.5, which I think has been the funding amount that's been allowed. Does the fact that that percentage would come in at 12.5 have anything to do with the allowable funding? Because I know there are many districts actually that are over 12.5. Know how that's derived?
That data is specifically taken from the CEDARS database, which is where the federal reporting goes into. So, for example, that's what goes to the Office of Civil Rights. So there definitely are districts and there's charters that are above that percentage, but as an average, those are the averages that we have in that database.
And the second question, and I want to add to what Ms. White said, I think this report's very informative and has a lot of good information. Obviously reflects a lot of hard work, and so thank you for that. The second one was, is there disaggregated data that shows how each of the subgroups is doing at their program?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that.
Is there disaggregated data for how each of the subgroups is doing?
Deanna, can you help me with that? I didn't hear that.
So the question was, is there disaggregated data to show specifically how the subgroups at each of the respective schools are doing?
Oh, yes, there is subgroup data for both of the two schools. There is within the report, there should be information on the subgroups. We only have 2 years of it, but there is for each subgroup, there is data on that. I don't know if you're looking for more specific data or a specific subgroup.
I can follow up on that. I don't want to take everyone's time.
Okay.
But my last question was, there was discussion in the recommendation itself about a requirement number 6 and some thoughts that CSAB had about that. And I don't know that that was the same as the recommendation, the 3 points in the recommendation. Could someone clarify that for me?
Is that from the original recommendations perhaps, or is that from the reporting requirement?
From the board materials is what I'm looking
at. Well, I do know for the recommendations, the CSAB wanted to focus more on, rather than expanding the program or continuing the program at this point, since they are continuing for another several years, they wanted to focus on the improvement of the program and gathering more information so that the relevant stakeholders can make informed decisions.
All right, and last quick question is, and thank you for letting me ask these. Is there a decision already been made that the students in the charter virtual academies will not take end of year exams? There's a lot of reference to mid-year checkpoints. There's been a decision already made that they would not be taking any kind of end of year.
Not that I am aware of. My understanding is that if they enroll in one of the schools this year, that whatever state testing occurs, that they will take those same assessments.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And as a point of advocacy, last year when decisions were made by this body about particularly seniors and grading and reporting, there was a expression of disappointment that students who had been engaged in the virtual academies all year long and their instructional delivery had not changed as a result of COVID, that they weren't allowed to capture those senior grades as they normally should. So I'll highlight that as another point that we would hope that students who chose to enroll in NC Cyber and NC Virtual for this year, that any grades that are earned by those students be reflected on those transcripts. Any other questions from board members about this? This is an item of discussion. It'll be back before us for approval next month. Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and move to EICS 3, which is the request to rescind the restart application of Kannapolis City Schools. And Dr. Cynthia Martin, are you online with us?
I am. Good afternoon. So district and regional support is bringing to you the request of Kannapolis City Schools. They are requesting to rescind their restart application for Kannapolis Middle School. Kannapolis Middle School is the only restart school within this district. They have cited the following reasons for why they want to rescind. First, the flexibilities are no longer needed and may in some way hamper continued improvement. Secondly, staffing flexibilities have not proven needed. And last, the financial flexibility has not proven to be as productive, and the system can better support the school with other funding sources while utilizing allotted positions for staffing. The district also detailed their support for the school. District supports include weekly check-ins with an assigned district administrator, routine reviews of district budget and finances, and ongoing analysis of staffing and licensing. The district and local board of education also review the school improvement plan and monitor the progress. Kannapolis Middle School began implementing the restart model during the 2017-18 year. They were a part of the first cohort. And as of the 2021 school year, they are currently in their fourth year of implementation. Because in our history with school districts rescinding, we have not had a school so far in the process to rescind. Usually rescission takes place in the implementation or the planning or first year of implementation. So I've asked Ms. Julie Garber, who is our strategic reform support lead, to join us just to give you an opportunity to hear how this school measures up with the policy for academic gain that you all enacted in March. Julie?
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Good afternoon, board members. Just to go back for you and remind you, in March, you all approved the policy for academic gain that allowed us to review these schools based on certain criteria. And also it allows these schools to demonstrate progress in with more opportunity to demonstrate progress with smaller incremental gains towards improving student outcomes. So what I would like to share with you is the feedback that we provided to Kannapolis Middle after March and delivered in July, was that this school, Kannapolis Middle, is on track to meet academic gain expectations. So there is a 5-year review process, as you know, within the policy. And according to their data, they are on track to meet that academic gain in year 5, meaning that if their data from 18-19, of course, we don't have the current data for from 19-20, so this is based on 18-19 data. If this data were to remain the same or improve, the school would be meeting expectations and would continue their restart authorization. So to give you specifics about their demonstration of academic gain, they had an achievement score over the past 3 years that demonstrated a 4.2% increase. So over 3 years, they've increased their achievement score. That's the reading, math, EL progress, and science assessments, 4.2 percentage points. As well, they have 66.7 of their subgroups have met growth. And of course, that data is only available the last 2 years. So rather than 3 years, it's a 2-year demonstration. Specifically, they have 6 out of their 9 subgroups meeting growth. They are still designated low performing based on the 18-19 data and designated for this year, and still designated recurring low performing. But as you can see from what I shared on academic gain, they have been demonstrating that incremental growth towards improving student outcomes. And with that, I will ask if there are any questions that I could answer.
Ms. Garber, I'm not seeing any, and thank you, Dr. Cynthia Martin, for bringing us to the table for discussion. I feel like I need to communicate with my colleagues that there was significant pause and discussion during our pre-committee work about the existing exit strategies that we have in place if a school so chooses this late in the process to exit the restart model. And this particular presentation of data by Ms. Garber, thank you for pulling that together, is a little frustrating because progress has been made, yet the assertion of the school is that the flexibilities that have been offered are not the things that are contributing to the progress. So it makes me ask the question, okay, if you weren't exercising the flexibilities, then what is it that did contribute to your progress? We don't currently have in place a continuation of the restart model that suggests once a school is ready to fly, how do we continue to support them as they make that transition or once those flexibilities are removed? So that's an area for future discussion around our low performing schools. Ms. Garber did reemphasize that it is still it's still designated as low performing. So this is not a school that's out there, I mean, burning down the forest with just students that are high flyers. So it gives me room for additional consideration about how we handle this.
Ms. White.
Yes, who's speaking?
This is Ms. Kamnitz.
Yes, hi, Ms. Kamnitz, go ahead.
I think we also, I mean, there's a big blank place here because of last year and we don't have the data, but there's also, it's hard to imagine that there's not going to be some slippage in student performance, and yet they're asking for release from restart. So I think that's of concern as well.
I concur with that, Ms. Kamnitz. Other board members on this? Well, it's a discussion item for us, not that we won't actually take action. What I'd like to do is to go back to the critical thinkers around this model and maybe come back with, if we were to approve their request to rescind, what action would we take? That we need to have that as part of our decision making matrix. So, Dr. Martin and Ms. Garber, I hate to do that, but it's an opportunity for us to create a pathway forward for other schools that are ready to move out of this model. So I'm excited about that conversation.
So we will be back to discuss just that.
Okay, thank you. Board members, we have 2 items on consent this month. One is EICS4, and this is Woods Charter School with a request before us to implement a weighted lottery. This school is in Chatham County. It has a current EDS population of 5%, and its proposal suggests that they'd like to move to have this lottery to move them to more 24-25%, and that's more reflective of the public schools in Chatham County. I also note, I think I'm saying this correctly, Mr. Machado, that they are doing this without an application through the NC Access Grant. So we are ecstatic that this charter school has taken it upon themselves to really think forward about how they can be more inclusive. EICS 5 is a report to the General Assembly on low-performing schools, which you heard last month, so it's Mr. Chair, that concludes our report.
Thank you, Ms. White. And that concludes our morning, early afternoon work. We'll take a break and reconvene at 1:50. 1:50.